Tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about food security. Now, of course, as farmers, we think about food safety. We talk a lot about food safety, but food security is how do people obtain food around the world? And do they have enough food to eat? So as we think about the crop, our corn crop behind us here, looking good in central Illinois. But as we think about food security, do people have food in front of them every day? Now, fortunate for most of us Americans, we have food in front of us every day. But as you think about world trade, and this was a topic that I've researched a couple of different times and have had the opportunity to travel to Brazil, go to Japan on a market study tour, and hopefully get to travel a couple other places. But as you think about trade and what it really involves and why it's such a big deal for agriculture and agriculture subsidies, mind you, what's going on in our marketplace today, and you think about ChemChina and them buying Syngenta and why that's such a big deal. Remember, a hungry nation is a dangerous nation, because if people are going to starve, they realize that they're going to die anyway of starvation, so they will go to any end to get food. And so as you think about world trade and understanding why it's important to have trading partners and what it means for our business and agriculture, we are the number one reason that people are so concerned about trade, because they need to feed their people. And you know, whether it's the US, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Brazil or Argentina or China or Japan or Russia, Ukraine, you name the country, they're worried about feeding their people. So as we think about food security and whether or not we have enough to go around, that's where trade matters. So if you think about the World Trade Organization and all of these countries who play a role in sitting at the table and thinking about trade, and are there tariffs or barriers or what happens? And of course, it's a really in-depth conversation. But in 2001, there was an organization or a group of countries that went together and formed what's called the Doha Round. And, you know, they went and started to work on trading issues. And of course, guess what was the most controversial? Agriculture. So these countries, of course, of which USA and Europe were the leading countries in some of those discussions. But then in 2008, they started breaking down some barriers. And in fact, one of the Doha Round meetings there were some security issues, so they ended up not having the meeting and delayed it. So you think about 2001 to 2008, and then in 2014 they tried to start these meetings up again, and it's still kind of going, but it's kind of a subcommittee, if you will, of the World Trade Organization, thinking about how are we trading across the world, around the world, and what are we doing to make sure that our trading partners, we have fair and equal trade. And you can argue whether it's fair or equal or who has the better deal. But at the end of the day, the most controversial issue within the World Trade Organization is agriculture. And especially as U.S. farmers, who today, we all know that subsidies are a key topic that most farmers want to have an opinion on, whether we're a corn or soybean farmer here in the Midwest, or whether we're a cotton farmer in the South, or a wheat farmer in the West, or a cattle rancher, or a dairy producer. All of those pieces of the agriculture industry receive some sort of subsidy, whether it's through crop insurance or direct payments. And I think as you see the challenge of our budget in the U.S. that is always being challenged to save money, we're going to have to find ways to exist without subsidies. And I think as young farmers just getting started, we really have an advantage because we're not necessarily used to some of the payments that used to be received. And I think as you look down the next 5 to 10 years, we will be operating without subsidies. Now, what does that mean for world trade? well, that puts us at a more even playing field because other countries aren't subsidizing their farmers. So arguably, from their standpoint, they don't want subsidies because that makes our crop cheaper than what they can produce it. So, as you think about subsidies and world trade and what we do here in the U.S. and how we operate, and as we get around to, if you think about the supply and demand and economics that you learned in college or even in high school, if we got rid of subsidies, does that really help us on the world trade front? Well, as you can imagine, then the price of the dollar goes into play, and there are so many external sources that we don't necessarily control as farmers that go into play on what we make at the end of the year, whether we buy or sell at what price, and so we don't have much choice in that. But it's an interesting perspective that I think we all need to think about is, how do we exist around the world? What do our trading partners look like? What's the World Trade Organization talking about? How are we expanding our exports? Are we even expanding our exports? Who are our trading partners and those consumers that we need to be paying attention to, not just in the U.S.? And do a little bit of research on that, because it's not one of those things that is really something we think about every day, but it's certainly important to our supply and demand. And for those of you who've had a conversation with me about organic farmers, which, of course, the farm I'm at today is an organic farm, and that's great, but my advice to organic farmers is keep the government out of it. Because if you think about organic farmers today have the best of both worlds. They actually have the law of supply and demand and true economics playing for them. Now, are there risks associated with that? Absolutely. But because they have a free market that nobody knows how much corn an organic farmer is going to produce, because it's not subsidized. So therefore, we don't have to go and report acres because they're not getting subsidies necessarily on their acreage like a conventional farmer is. Or arguably, if you think about farm subsidies going away, does that help our cause if we don't have to report acres because we're not getting subsidies? That starts to change the game, and it's something that as a farmer we have to think about. How are we operating within the world? So anyway, something to think about. World trade, it's a complex issue. If you don't know about the Doha round, take a look at that. Again, it was back in 2001 that it was started, but it's certainly an interesting topic that I find intriguing as you think a little bit outside the box of how the agriculture industry plays around the world. So thanks for listening tonight. I'm going to show you my great live listener here just because she's just awesome. But there's Penny. Penny's been a good listener tonight, much like all of you. Happy as can be. Right, Penny? So thanks for hosting to some good friends. Needed a little cornfield for a backdrop. I've got to head off to a Farm Bureau meeting tonight, our board meeting. So, good luck with the truck pulling. I talked to your brother, and he gave me the okay. So, anyway, thanks for hosting to the friends of mine there, and good luck at the Heart of Illinois Fair truck pulling. Hopefully the truck stays together. And we'll see you tomorrow night, hopefully, on Farming Friday and Supper with Sean. Thanks for listening, everybody.